Hi, I'm Jenny Davis, and my
Hi, I'm Henrietta Land. Hi, I'm Henrietta Land from the University of Melbourne, Australia, and I'll be presenting the
Question. So this is going to be live, right?
Yeah.
So we'll start.
This is session 19, right?
Yes.
It should be streaming.
Yeah, it's not.
Okay, let me check on that. I gotta get back
All
there.
right. Wait. Tell me when.
All right. Seeing if they're running out on mine. Not seeing it on there. Let me call.
So do you see the streaming? I don't see it yet. Or do you see it as? No, I don't. Okay. It doesn't seem to be streaming yet. Okay.
Streaming that one back there. That's what tells me it's streaming. Let me call him.
Okay. So good afternoon, everybody. This is paper session 19, Sociology and Machine Learning, and I have been asked to be your session chair for the moment. So who identifies as someone in social sciences? Can you raise your hand if you will say that social sciences is your thing? And who is more into computer science or has a background more in computer science? Okay, thanks. Thank you very much. So we have 5 papers in the session. The papers 1, 4, and 5 in the session are videos. So what we're going to do is to watch the video for paper 1. Then we are going to have 2 live presentations of paper 2 and 3, and we will do the Q&A. And then if you want to stay, you can watch the videos for paper 4 and 5 after the Q&A. Okay? So we will start with the video for paper Affordances for Machine Learning.
Hi, I'm Jenny Davis, and my talk is titled Affordances for Machine Learning. Here I'll argue that an operational affordance framework can help bridge machine learning's principles to practice gap. The talk starts with a problem, machine learning's principles to practice gap. From here, I propose an operational framework of affordances, the mechanisms and conditions framework, as a way of bridging this gap, and exemplify the utility of the framework across 3 briefly described case examples. So let's start with the problem, which is that the field of machine learning has a pernicious and persistent principles to practice gap, with lots of directives indicating what practitioners ought to do in the development and deployment of machine learning systems, but a dearth of effective ways to practically execute. I propose that we can bridge this gap through an operational framework of affordances, the mechanisms and conditions framework, which scaffolds human-technology relations and context. This framework can effectively bridge the gap by giving specificity and a shared vocabulary that spans analysis and design. Affordances refer to the ways technologies shape but do not determine the uses and functions for socially situated subjects. The mechanisms and conditions framework operationalizes this construct, representing a structural relational turn in affordance theory. The mechanisms and conditions framework has 2 parts. The mechanisms, which specify how technologies afford, and the conditions, which address variation across subjects and context. The mechanisms of affordance indicate that technologies enable and constrain with varying degrees of force, requesting, demanding, encouraging, discouraging, refusing, and allowing social outcomes. These mechanisms are conditioned on 3 interrelated dimensions: perception, what someone knows about a technology's functions; dexterity, how skilled and able someone is in a technology's operation; and cultural and institutional legitimacy, how socially supported someone is in technological engagement. The framework's the tool of both analysis and design, of specifying what is and imagining what will or what could be. Through 3 case examples, I'll show how the mechanisms and conditions framework can be used as a tool of both detailed analysis and intentional design, both requisites for implementing and reflexively auditing the principles that materialize in machine learning applications. We'll sprint through these examples for purposes of time, but I want to touch on all 3 to highlight the generalizability of this affordance approach. Example 1 focuses on the labor conditions at Amazon fulfillment centers. Workers in these fulfillment centers do 2 main things: stock products to be picked and pick products to be shipped. Warehouse processes are built as smart and efficient, driven by always learning systems that advance and govern based on a slurry of data obtained through various means of tracking, tracing, sensing, and feedback, producing algorithms that hire and fire, set and display timers for increasingly granular tasks, adjust shift periods, dictate how, when, and where employees move, and that punish workers who are out of sync, too slow, too stagnant, dissatisfied, or union inclined. Pictured here is an affordance analysis through the mechanisms and conditions framework, documenting how and for whom Amazon deploys its extractive forms of data governance. So we can say, for example, that these data-driven systems request discretization and automation of warehouse tasks, allowing management to not only monitor, but also discipline and replace workers. Management, too, become replaceable and acquiescent, more to systems that demand attention to metrics, discourage, and in some cases, refuse skilled and subjective decision-making, and request at multiple levels service to corporate goals, even when these goals conflict with workers' and managers' labor and human interests. Moreover, neither managers nor workers have the cultural and institutional legitimacy, a condition of affordance, to alter, reprogram, or recalibrate system properties, thus refusing agentic input over the very infrastructures that demand bodily and temporal compliance. Recall that the mechanisms and conditions framework is a tool of both analysis and design. Here I put forth proposals for a redesigned warehouse infrastructure based on principles that align with Amazon workers' unionization efforts and related demands. These include de-individualized employee tracking, removal or expansion of time rates, and scheduling systems that give stability to employees in shift assignment while empowering workers through pooled shift trades. Rather than go through the whole table, let's just look at one line to see how it operates. Here in row 2, we see the proposal to undo or expand time rates, meaning, for instance, the slowest band rather than the fastest. This changes from a system that demands able-bodiedness, refusing age, illness, impairment, or fatigue, to one that allows, even encourages, a diversity of bodies who do warehouse work. Let's go to the second example, which focuses on massively parallel sequencing, or MPS. It is a genetic sequencing instrument with processing capacities exponentially greater than existing methods. Though originating in medicine, MPS has been repurposed by law enforcement as a tool of inferential phenotyping. In its carceral application, MPS uses genetic markers to infer biogenetic ancestry, gender, and eye color of a suspect based on DNA found at a crime scene. MPS is currently utilized by the Australian Federal Police, whose lead scientist promises near-future developments that expand inferences to include distance between the eyes, eye, nose, and ear shape, lip fullness, and cheek structure. Articulated through the mechanisms of affordance and represented in Table 4, MPS demands integration between physical characteristics and character assessment, requesting and encouraging correspondence between physiology and criminality, tied to existing patterns of policing in which suspicion begets criminalization, begetting suspicion, and so forth. MPS also discourages contestation and intercession from affected communities. For once criminalization is established, the burden of proof shifts to suspected individuals and to those with now suspicious bodies. Yet the accused and the surveilled lack the cultural and institutional legitimacy to call such decisions into question, nor do most people, including officers, judges, and other criminal judicial actors, have the dexterity or skill and knowledge to interrogate these systems and evaluate their veracity. Note that we just have an analysis table, and for this example, that's where we're going to stop. This contrasts with example 1, in which there was a second phase of redesign. Here with MPS, as used in policing, there's no space to reimagine. As the analysis lays bare, this application is untenable. The third and final case example shifts the target of focus. Examples 1 and 2 apply affordance framing to machine learning applications. Here instead, the analytic target is a social system with affordances that can be identified and transformed through machine learning models. This move requires a reading of institutions as artifacts of human making, implements that can be scrutinized and redesigned in much the same way as material technologies. With this reading, institutions are subject to an affordance lens, while machine learning acts as both a reflective mirror and constructive tool for social change. Specifically, the mechanisms and conditions framework can pair with ML outputs to collaboratively reveal and thus diagnose and modify structural social patterns. For this example, I'll draw on work by So and colleagues in their fact paper from 2022, in which they applied inferential statistics and machine learning models to assess a housing reparations program, calculating the intergenerational costs of historical discriminations and comparing those to a real reparations program in Evanston, Illinois, whereby Black residents were eligible for reparative repayments that ended up coming part of the way, but didn't fully rectify historical injustice. Conveyed within affordance framing in Table 5, we can say that institutionalized lending practices have historically encouraged banks to deny Black borrowers, requested disproportionate white wealth, and discouraged or perhaps refused racial equity and neighborhood integration, while existing reparative measures encourage remediation, but in their present form refuse full compensation. Of note, machine learning is not necessary to recognize the intergenerational economic and social consequences of institutionalized wealth inequalities tied to housing loan and insurance access, nor do we need computational models to understand the validity of economic reparations. However, in the pairing of affordances with machine learning, these realities obtain not only clear articulation, but also weight and precision, setting the stage for interventions of both policy and practice. So through this presentation, I've made a case for the mechanisms and conditions framework as a bridge between principles and practice. I'll close with 4 considerations when applying this framework as a tool of analysis and design. Analysis and design are intertwined and reciprocal, with machine learning systems made and remade through continuous, ongoing, critical reflexive work. However, front-end design should take precedence. Once systems are built, they run on their own inertia, setting parameters and foreclosing alternative paths. In the words of Hassan and colleagues, these systems leave imprints even after dismantle. Affordance analysis also must attend to technologies embedded as embedded objects entangled with the politics and power of sociostructural circumstances and the ways these sociostructural circumstances materialize through design. Finally, affordance analysis and design depend on the people in the proverbial room. If we take seriously the point that those on the margins have the clearest and sharpest perspectives, then diversifying tech is more than a corporate mandate, but a justice requisite in material terms. Thanks for attending this talk, and I'll leave you with some resources for deeper engagement.
All right, there is no need to clap. The presenter is not in the room. We will watch the second paper now.
If I speak here, it's okay? The mic? Okay, I am not too tall for the mic. Okay. Fairness in machine learning from the perspective of sociology of statistics. How machine learning is becoming scientific by turning its back on metrological realism. My name is Bilal Benbouzid. I am a sociologist in Paris. My specialty is sociology of science, and I'm trying to do a sociology of quantification on fairness in machine learning. Okay, let's start with this famous quote from John Rawls in Theory of Justice. Justice is the first virtue of social institution, as trust is of system of thought. For those participating at FACT, this famous analogy may sound strange. Predictive machines are both social institutions and system of thought. This connection of justice and trust is the raison d'être of my interest for fairness in machine learning as an object of sociology of statistics. Fairness in machine learning is not just a case among others for sociology of statistics. It is a place where we can observe a contemporary transformation in the politics of statistics. To understand it, let's take this important contribution in sociology of statistics from Ted Porter's book. To become trustworthy, Ted Porter says. Classically, experts in quantification sought to eliminate any trace of politics from their measurement tools, excluding judgment and struggling against subjectivity, the pursuit of mechanical objectivity, as Ted Porter says. Since the 19th century, the development of statistical practices has been driven much more by the value of neutrality than that of trust, said Ted Porter. But fairness in machine learning, and especially the fact conference, is making the mechanical objectivity not relevant anymore. What I will show you here is a kind of objectivity and epistemology behind the field of fairness in machine learning. Against mechanical objectivity, I observe a quest for a trained judgment. What is a trained judgment? I use the term trained judgment from the book of Daston and Gallison in the history of different forms of objectivity, where they propose the category of trained judgment as an alternative to mechanical objectivity, as a way to give more room to expert interpretation. In the field of FML, we observe a tension between two different forms of objectivity that entail an epistemological problem. The improbable coexistence of the methodological realism of statistics and the constructivism of the social sciences. And this difficult coexistence was analyzed by Alain Desrosières in his wonderful book, The Politics of Large Numbers. My question today is, how does this de facto constructivism in fairness in machine learning manifest itself in concrete terms? The best way to respond to this question is to socially localizing the formation of FML. I've paid attention to three researchers that are most often presented as the pioneers of the research on fairness in machine learning: Ellen Nissenbaum, Cynthia Dwork, and Latanya Sweeney. These three researchers show how three different epistemic virtues, in the sense of epistemic responsibility, can coexist and intertwine. Open-mindedness toward philosophy. In the field of computer science and in the field of engineering, the virtue of open-mindedness is not very, is very rare. I teach in School of Engineering. And these three, and there are two engineers, has this open-mindedness toward philosophy. Rigor in mathematical reasoning and a kind of political engagement. These epistemic virtues have changed the meaning of bias in statistics. Bias is not just measuring the distance between errors and reality. Bias are becoming a scientific problem of normativity, a norm of social justice. To represent this new science of statistical normativity, studies on fairness in machine learning are generally divided into three broad groups of approach: group fairness, individual fairness, and causal fairness. Most systematic review in the literature pits these against each other in a table. For example, the famous book of Barocas and others, and collaborators. Sometimes philosophers try to associate this metric with a particular theory of social justice. I think this representation of the field does not explain the specific epistemology and ethical problem of machine learning. The field should instead be seen as an interacting component in a dynamic of controversies. I do sociology of controversies, where each approach brings a more interpretative logic to the fore. I propose in the paper an alternative representation of the field. Not the field of fact, but of the field of measuring fairness. By tracing the history of scientific debate over the past decade, I propose two axes. The horizontal axe of association means the association of new conception of fairness, and the vertical axe of substitutions means simply the substitution of the previous proposition. And I trace a front line of research where we can see that the drive to automate morality is pitted against the quest for the expert-trained judgment based on an ever more political sense of quantification. I will show you how methods for integrating fairness into predictive machine are become progressively less automatic. First of all, the controversy begins with the moral economy of group fairness. Calibration and demographic parity appear as two good solutions. I don't have time here to explain these metrics. Just keep in mind for many engineers, calibration was a good convention based on the engineering value of modeling efficiency. And demographic parity was a good convention based on the legal conception of fairness because it shaped algorithmic decision in the direction of compensation in an unfair society. Maurice Hartz, one of the most influential researchers in the field, has argued that these two metrics are not good means to reduce fairness. And he proposed the equality of opportunity metrics not only for mathematical reasons, but also for political reasons. Calibration cannot be considered as a social justice intervention because it is just a means to improve the performance of the machine. And statistical parity can be seen as the very opposite of fairness because it involves a more of affirmative action that is not rooted in any meritocratic principle. And he proposed equality of opportunity as a better means to reduce fairness because it is a task specific, thus involving both the modeler and the user in understanding and refining the models. The argument of equality of opportunity is in favor of more intervention and less automatization. Okay, I go quickly. Can I have maybe 5? No, but group fairness is formulated at an aggregated level, and it has been shown that this aggregation can produce a form of fairness gerrymandering, regardless of metric. Group fairness can result in discrimination against subgroups that lie at the intersection between different protected groups. It is a problem of intersectionality. And then after this problem of intersectionality, we can see fairness through awareness, individual fairness as another proposition to less automatically measuring fairness. And after that, there is a causal reasoning for algorithmic fairness. Excuse me. And at the end, this is proposition from Lily Hu and Isa Kohler-Osman for constitutive diagram. And is a next step to more interpretation. Okay, and I think this controversy can evolve and toward the integration of increasingly plural formulation of the social into AI system. Then to become scientific, paradoxically, machine learning must progressively turn its back on realist conception of quantification. And to conclude, because I would like to show you something, I would like to mention the comment of one of the reviewers. After reading this paper, I am still left wondering, so what? I can understand. While fact may be an interesting case study for scholars outside your community looking in, I struggle to understanding the key takeaway is for fact. I am totally agree with the reviewer. It is a critique against sociology all the time, so what? But what I am saying is obvious for the community of FML. But everything is obvious when you have the answer. But at the end of the statement, he found himself the response of this skepticism about the interest of a sociology of statistics. So, the reviewers say, what does this paper analysis of the tension in this community offer researchers in the field? Or maybe another interesting question related to this paper is, how has the highly interdisciplinary nature of fact enabled the improbable coexistence of the methodological realism of statistics and the constructivism of the social sciences? What does this unique coexistence have to offer broader computing field? This is exactly the kind of question I wish to open with the modest contribution to the social epistemology of fairness in machine learning. Thank you, and sorry for the time. And sorry to read my stuff.
Hi, I'm Markel Kelly. I'm from UC Irvine, and I'll be presenting my paper on a Bayesian item response theory framework for understanding humans' mental models of AI agents. To motivate this work, suppose we have some hybrid team consisting of a human and an AI agent that are working together on some predictive task. Ideally, this team can benefit from both the strengths of the humans and of AI agents. Formally, this goal is referred to as complementarity, the idea that this team should achieve better performance jointly than either the human or the AI agent working on the predictive task alone. And while it's been shown empirically that this is possible in practice, it's not necessarily something that we get for free. In particular, complementarity depends on human behavior. If the human is deciding when to defer to the AI agent or how strongly to weight the prediction of the AI agent, the human's mental model of the AI agent plays an important role in those decisions and thus in the team performance. This is what my work aims to understand better, is the mental models of the AI agents that the humans are working alongside. In particular, this work looks at two research questions. The first has to do with the dimensionality of the mental models. What I mean by that is whether humans are trying to pick up on different strengths and weaknesses of AI agents, or whether they're kind of putting it into a box of good or bad. This is really important for complementarity because the granularity at which a person is deferring to an AI agent is important for the team performance if they can defer to the agent in the right circumstances. Secondly, I'm interested in the relationship between mental models of oneself and mental models of an AI agent. This is important, again, for complementarity, because if a person is differentiating the AI agent from themselves somehow, that will also influence when they defer to the AI agent. Whether they think the AI agent is good is maybe a different question than whether they think the AI agent is better than themselves. To answer these questions, I first conducted experiments on Amazon Mechanical Turk to try to tease out participants' mental models of AI agents. Then, with a combination of empirical analysis and the modeling framework that I'll talk about in a bit, I looked at the answers to these research questions in the context of this data. So I'll start by giving a quick overview of the experiments I conducted. Participants had to answer sets of 12 trivia questions corresponding to some topic, such as history of art. After each set of 12 questions, participants estimated their own performance on the problem set, as well as the performance of some AI agent. They then repeated this experiment for several different topics. So the topics were art, video games, math, and cities. And after each set of questions, answered these two questions. We used these 4 different topics to try to tease out dimensionality of mental models. Are people trying to figure out if an AI agent is good at math and bad at art or something like that? To have a one-to-one comparison of mental models of AI agents and other humans, some participants were randomly assigned to assess the performance of another person with a randomly generated name like Sonia. Importantly, performance was matched here on a topic-wise basis to kind of prevent performance from being a confounding factor. Really, people were just looking at what they were told the agent was. Finally, some participants received feedback, so after they answered these 2 questions, they then immediately saw their true performance and the true performance of the other agent so that we could look at how mental models developed over time in the presence of feedback. So quickly, I'll describe the modeling framework that we use to understand these mental models. The key principle of the modeling framework is item response theory. This is a family of latent variable models that's commonly used in cognitive science and education to understand test scores. The key idea here is that a person's score on some set of problems can be thought of as some function of that person's ability and the difficulty of the problem set. You can think about if you score very highly on some set of problems, it could be because you're very good at that type of problem, it could have just been a very easy problem set, or some combination of those 2 things. So the only thing we observe here is the true scores, and then we can estimate these latent ability and difficulty parameters with something like MCMC sampling. The way that we can apply this framework to mental models is by looking at perceived performance in addition to true performance. So we can think about a person's perception of their own performance in terms of their perceptions of their own ability and their perceptions of how difficult the problem set was for them. Analogously, we can do this for mental models of agents. So again, we can have a person's mental model of the ability of some AI agent or other human and how difficult a problem set was for that agent. So quickly, I'll go over some of the results from the paper in the context of this data. The way that we tested the dimensionality of mental models was by comparing a one-dimensional item response theory model with a multi-dimensional model. What that means is that in the one-dimensional case, ability is just a single number, a scalar. Is it good at trivia questions or bad at trivia questions? In the multi-dimensional model, ability becomes a vector of different abilities. So in this case, the first row could correspond to art, and the second row, video games, and so on. So people in the multi-dimensional model are trying to pick up on different abilities for different topics. What we found in the experiments is that the multidimensional model is the best fit for the data for both other humans and AI agents. So no matter who or what participants were assessing, they were trying to figure out, are the agents better at one topic and worse at another topic, or something like that. One kind of bonus result here that we get for free is we can look at the latent correlations between abilities. So I know this is maybe a lot, but the key idea here is that the true correlations between performance on different topics are actually the same, and people saw this in these graphs. So even when people were observing the same performance, they perceived the AI agent's abilities to be much more correlated than those of the other humans. So for example, if we look at the kind of intersection of video games and art, if a person saw an AI agent do well on a video games question, they perceived that the AI agent was also doing very well on art questions, but that didn't really apply to the perceptions of other humans. So looking quickly at the relationship between mental models of oneself and other agents, the way that we tested this was by looking at different hierarchical structures between the latent variables corresponding to one's self-assessed performance and one's other assessed performance. So specifically, we hypothesized different relationships between one's perception of their own ability and their perception of the other agent's ability, and one's perception of how difficult the problem set was for them versus how difficult it was for the other agent. In particular, we tested 3 different setups here. So first we have the undifferentiated model, where people didn't learn a different mental model for the AI agent. Whatever was difficult for them was difficult for the other agent, and they just assumed their ability was a good measure of the other agent's ability. The second model is the differentiated by ability model. So here again, people assume that problems that are difficult for them are also difficult for other agents, but they learn some differential between their ability and the ability of the other agents. So their mental model is still using, their mental model of the other agent is still using their mental model of themselves as a starting point, but then they'll pick up on, oh, the agent is better than me at this type of problem, and the agent's worse than me at this type of problem. So the mental model is still defined in relationship to their perception of themselves. Finally, in the fully differentiated model, we break that association. So the person just starts from scratch when developing a mental model of another agent. It doesn't have some differential from their own ability or difficulty. What we found in our experiments is that the fully differentiated model had the best fit for our data on assessment of AI agents. So people weren't thinking about the AI agent in relationship to themselves. They were really starting from scratch when they were developing their ideas about its difficulties and its abilities. However, we didn't see this for the assessment of other humans. We saw that people were kind of using their own ability as a starting point when understanding the ability of another person. So this is kind of one of the key differences on how people are developing mental models of themselves and of other agents. So I have the title of the paper up here again. We go through in the paper kind of 3 key results using this data and this framework. The first, which I didn't really touch on in this talk, is incomplete development of mental models. So we saw that for the kind of relatively simple problem, people still weren't kind of converging to true mental models from what they should have been. Secondly, we saw the general intelligence bias that was reflected in those correlation matrices, that people expect an AI agent to have one kind of universal or general intelligence, in the context at least of trivia questions, while they expect people to have more of pockets of expertise. And finally, we saw over-differentiation of AI from self. People really expect AI agents to perform differently from themselves, even when they're seeing evidence to the contrary. So please check out the paper if you're interested. Thank you. Should I just stay up here?
So we do have the 4th presenter in the room, so we'll hear the 4th presentation and then do the Q&A.
See if I can download this one. Thank you. So this work is almost entirely completed by our PhD student, Henrietta Lyons, who unfortunately decided not to come to the conference, so I'm stepping in for him. My name's Tim. And so this work's about contestability. A PhD is largely about contestability. So to sort of motivate the problem, I want you to imagine you're a driver for a rideshare company, and the rideshare company uses some sort of algorithmic surveillance mechanism to try and detect drivers that are trying to cheat the system. And for example, a well-known cheat is that drivers will band together, turn their phones off, and wait for a price surging to occur, and then use the price surging and turn their phones back on and get links. So you're in a particular situation where perhaps your phone has run out of battery, and then the next day you find out that the ride you got that you should have earned $110 for, you've actually been docked $42 of pay because your phone was turned off immediately before that. If you're in that situation, how should you be able to contest that decision from your employer? And there's a whole lot of work around procedural fairness, around how people can contest decisions, but we're really looking at a specific instance where, one, the initial decision was made algorithmically, and two, how should you contest that? Well, I forgot I had that slide. Okay, and there's a whole lot of questions we're sort of trying to look at here, but in this particular paper here, we're looking at who will conduct the review. And so recently there's been a bit of work out that's argued, reasonably convincingly, actually we can use, because the scale of decisions, of automated decisions, can be so large, it's perhaps inconceivable to expect that we'll get a human review for every decision. But you can use algorithms as reviewers themselves to do basic checking, or even use an alternate model trained on a different data set with a different method to check at least first do the two decisions match. But we're looking at this particular paper on who will conduct the review. And so we look at human reviewer, and there's a lot of really great reasons why we might want to use a human reviewer, primarily, sort of that sense of being heard and the sense of dignity for why you might want to actually have a reviewer that's a human rather than algorithm. Just go back to my notes. The second option you might have, though, is this algorithmic reviewer, which is going to be able to scale, and in fact there's an argument that it might be less biased, at least there's potential to make it less biased compared to a human. And also it's going to be much more consistent than a human reviewer. So there is reasons why we might want to consider this despite easy objections. So in earlier work, Henrietta's earlier work, we did a simple study where we looked at a few different aspects of algorithmic reviewers versus human reviewers. We did a whole lot of simple vignette experiments similar to the ones we're going to talk to here. And we found three key things that people like to have with a reviewer, and that is a reviewer that can understand their particular unique situations. They want reviewers that are what we said largely malleable, reviewers that they think they're going to be able to influence by interacting with them. And they want to be able to participate, and that is have a back and forward interaction with reviewers so that they can actually influence the reviewers' decisions. And we found it quite interesting. There was this general theme in that earlier study of what we call self-interest. In a lot of situations, people were arguing for why they wanted a human reviewer, and it largely came around to the idea that, well, I want to be able to change their mind. And we found this quite interesting because in the vignettes we gave, there was actually no reason to suggest the decision was wrong in the first place, but people seemed to think that this was something that they should be able to do, was change someone's mind. So we kind of think that this idea of voice was quite interesting. So people expressed this in voice, and they wanted process control around this when they did contestability, so that they could influence things, so that they could get a favourable decision, a decision that was for them. So in that paper we looked at a whole range of factors, like how much more would you pay for a human reviewer versus an algorithmic reviewer, where you can get a decision back very quickly. So in this paper we wanted to test a few different hypotheses about this. First of all, that we had a hypothesis that people would generally prefer a human reviewer over an algorithmic reviewer. We thought that people who had a stronger so-called desire for control in their life would have a stronger preference for a human reviewer because they would have a stronger sense of control here. That giving an opportunity to interact with the reviewer, rather than say, I'm going to submit all my documents and someone will conduct a review and come back, the ability to, let's say, chat with them or send interactive messages would have a stronger preference for a human review. a weaker preference for human review, sorry, and then that the higher the stakes of the decision, the stronger the preference for human review as well. So we conducted a whole lot of studies here, basically 3 different contexts, 3 different vignettes that we presented. The rider scenario, the rideshare scenario was one of these particular contexts, and we separated out three different conditions in each of those scenarios on the impact of the decision. So, for example, in the decision that I gave you where you had your phone off and you were a driver, we had a sort of low stakes thing where you received a formal warning, a higher stakes thing where you had some of your fare was taken off you, and a much higher stakes situation where you were suspended for a week and you lost income. And then we had, in a second context, on the second side here, we had this ability to interact with the reviewer, which was one of the other control variables that we had. And so these sort of contexts here set up those 3 questions that we talked about. We ran a whole lot of those studies using a prolific, similar to Mechanical Turk here, and I'll briefly go through what the thing was. And so after giving some constructions and consent demographic stuff, we gave people the different scenarios, and you can see down here, this was a very simple preference. Would you prefer the decision to be reviewed definitely by an algorithm versus a human? And we had some free text, and then we ran the desirability for control scale. And so these are basically the results here. So hypothesis 1 was strongly supported, strong preference for a human. The median was 85 out of 100, where 100 was definitely algorithm, 0 was definitely, 100 was definitely human, 0 was definitely algorithm. For the rest of it, Henrietta constructed a linear mixed effects model here, and we used those 3 variables, the impact, the interaction, and desire for control, as well as interaction variables for all of those. Ran a linear effects model. Then we eliminated all the models that were not significant at an alpha value of 5%, and we recalculated, and that's the final model that you see there on the left. And basically what we found, the high-level results were that, firstly, desire for control. The stronger the person's desire for control in their life was, the stronger the preference they had for human review. That hypothesis was confirmed. Giving interaction with the reviewer had very little effect, a non-significant effect at all. However, we actually think that the manipulation we used in the experiment might not have worked. I'll show you why in a minute. And then that the higher the stakes in the decision, the more the people wanted a human reviewer. So that hypothesis, that was also confirmed. The reason we think our manipulation might have failed is because when you read the qualitative data, we saw a very strong preference for the ability to actually interact with people. And you can see, some of the wording here, we saw words like convince, persuade, all these types of words that people thought that they had a malleable reviewer that they were able to persuade to change their mind. So basically the summary we have here is control, that this idea of being able to control what happens when you submit a review was very strong, and therefore that showed a really strong preference for human reviewer. That seemed to be very much a self-interest view. I want to change the decision rather than necessarily get the right decision. I just want the decision that's good for me. And so there's sort of future work here about how can you actually give people control if that's what you want. What other mechanisms can you have other than interaction? In the qualitative data especially, there was a lot of stuff around, look, I just want to make sure that my argument has been heard by somebody, and I don't think an algorithm's going to be able to hear me here, and that there's a whole lot of other factors that we'd need to isolate in this situation. And we're especially interested now in this interaction case. Some of the qualitative data kind of had the idea that, well, you can't really interact with the machine in any case in a meaningful way, but this was run 12 months ago before most people had interacted with the large language model, and does that simple change in the world change people's perceptions as well? Thanks very much for listening.
Come to the front for the Q&A. So we heard 3 very interesting presentations on the politics of data and politics of fairness metrics, which is, I think, a very interesting topic for many of us, and 2 presentations more on human factors of both the accuracy of machine learning and contestability of AI. Is there any question in the room? I would love to hear your questions, please.
Yeah, my question's for the item response theory talk. Yeah, thanks very much for the very nice talk. I was wondering about if you could look at if there are different kinds of participants who had different kinds of mental models about the AI system, and kind of if you had measured people's experiences kind of with AI systems like ChatGPT or things like this, also kind of relating to the last comment that was made by the last speaker, that like people's experiences may be changing their mental models.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have any formal results on that. These experiments were conducted in January of this year, so relatively recently after kind of the initial ChatGPT hype. So presumably a lot of these participants had at least heard something in the news about it. Yeah, like I said, we didn't try to profile participants or anything like that, but there definitely were participants that expected the AI agent to be completely perfect on all of the trivia questions. And one of the comments we got, there was like a feedback at the end, was a person who said, shouldn't the AI have known the answers to all of them? So there were people who expected like their prediction for the agent's performance was like a perfect score on every single one, where there's some people that were more flexible with it. But yeah, it would be an interesting direction for future work to look a little more at that.
Hi, my name is Miria from TU Delft. My question is from Tim Miller. Thanks for the presentation, really nice work. I was wondering, so you mentioned that you hypothesize around that maybe the manipulation for hypothesis number 3 did not really work, that people were asking for humans to be there because they would be able to persuade them potentially, so related to the outcome. In the area of, or the literature of contestability, there's a lot happening or a lot said around compassion as well, so more from an interpersonal justice perspective. Do you think that now with this large language models, if we wanted to have an agent that takes care of the review process, is it even desirable to actually try to shape the interaction that takes place in a way that there are these touches of compassion or compassion in the equation, basically.
Yeah. So if there's an algorithmic reviewer?
Yeah, so is it even desirable? Are you looking into that?
No, I mean, this is just only a personal opinion. I'm not speaking on behalf of Henrietta Eduardo. I would avoid any anthropomorphization of that process at all. When we say interactive, I wouldn't necessarily even say a dialogue chat. I would just say ability to get feedback and correct it. This exactly this type of thing where you can probably feel, I would say, heard, like you'd feel as if you can correct problems, but I would recommend avoiding any of that stuff, but I don't.
Thanks. I was just wondering.
Hi, I'm Luca. I'm a German PhD student. I have a question to Tim Miller as well. Thanks for the presentation. And I read your study or your colleague's study as decision subjects actually want to be heard, and they have, of course, self-interest. But as we have seen, algorithmic decision makers cannot provide that most of the time, or as of now. So what does that imply for the right to explanation? Because what can I actually do with an explanation, and if it doesn't provide means for me to kind of improve my outcome and doesn't make me heard? Any opinions on that?
I mean, the first thing explanation can give you is just some sort of information about whether it's worth going for a course, right? I mean, if you don't know why your account was cancelled, you have no idea whether to object to it. So if there could be if an explanation comes and you go, I absolutely agree, that was the case, I did something and therefore my decision is fine. So I got rejected for a loan and it seems perfectly sensible. That's the reason you would use explainability in that situation. That has nothing to do with whether you can be heard later on.
Thank you. Further questions? So, Bilal, the room is full of computer scientists, so I would love to hear what should we be reading about the politics of data, or like you mentioned some classic texts. Which of these will you say people should read it, must read it?
I think the book of Alain Desrosières, The Politics of Large Numbers, is the best book of the history of statistics, and maybe you know the book of Daston and Gallison, The History of Objectivity. Yes, it's. And the most important thing to read, maybe it's the idea of epistemic virtue, because I think the main problem, in my point of view, in the field of machine learning, there are too many positivist people, mainly in France. And Yann Lequin comes from France. And I teach in the school of Yann Lequin. They can't understand what we are doing here, in fact. I think if we change engineers, inside engineers, I mean, if they understand to be like Cynthia Dworks, to be like Latanya Sweeney, it means like to understand the politics dimension of quantification. I think ethics can become something real, but it's not just in a Norris paper you write something on ethics. It's changing people inside. And it's the epistemic virtue. It's the best concept for me about ethics of machine learning.
Thanks. Thank you for your answer. And let's thank all the speaker, please. So to close the session, we will watch the video from the last paper, and there will be no questions, obviously, but we will watch the video of the last paper now.
Okay, so I'm Morgan Curry. I'm a senior lecturer in Science, Technology, and Innovation Studies at the University of Edinburgh.
I'm Lena Podolec, a research fellow also at the University of Edinburgh.
Okay, so in this presentation, we summarize our paper on emotions in digital assemblages. And we argue that qualitative longitudinal research provides an invaluable tool in studying automated decision-making systems. And in particular here, it gives us insight into the lived experiences of users of automated systems. So first we will give a brief introduction of our study of an automated social security entitlement system in the United Kingdom called Universal Credit. Then we will describe our methodology and lastly, some of our key findings. So Universal Credit is the largest social security payment in the UK. Recipients apply for Universal Credit online and use an online account to communicate with staff and manage their cases. Universal Credit is also a means-tested and conditional benefit, so some recipients are required to work or actively look for work in order to qualify. But for our purposes in this talk, an important property of Universal Credit is that it features an automated payment algorithm that determines the amount of money a claimant receives each month. So the payment calculation goes as follows. Claimants start with a base level payment amount based on personal circumstances. Then for working claimants, this amount is adjusted depending on earnings over the month prior. The adjustment for earnings are based on data through a data exchange with the real-time information or RTI system of HMRC, and this is the UK's tax authority. So to summarize this, the more a claimant earns in the month prior, the less money they will receive in their next Universal Credit payment. So the data that we present in our paper comes from an ongoing qualitative longitudinal study started in 2022. Qualitative research provides insight on the experiential aspects of life. Qualitative longitudinal research focuses on tracking participants in real time and tracing changes over time. It provides an opportunity to explore the effects of these changes together with the participants. It's also ideal for facilitating trust with participants and for letting them communicate their situation as they see best. This method also allows the researchers to iterate data collection by follow-up questions and to change the research design. Qualitative longitudinal research is therefore very useful for studying automated decision-making systems like universal credit because it can respond to the dynamic nature of these systems as they impact users' lives. This method can also generate near real-time data when memories and emotions related to these automated decisions and changes are fresh. So we recruited 26 participants through local charities to take part in the study for 6 or 12 months, depending on the complexity of their cases. The study applies 2 methods for generating data with each participant. The first is semi-structured interviews, and the second are bi-weekly prompted updates through phone texts asking about participants' interaction